Alright, welcome back. Sebastian here. So time for my review of qualifying for the 2024 British Grand Prix. Again, the return of the mini board that I used on my travels last week. So, looked like it was a wet session to start. All drivers were going out on intermediates. Track basically still drying out from the really heavy rains that we had earlier in the day. And because of that, I wrote really super high track evolution expected throughout the session, assuming that, the drying out would continue. According to the FIA F1 Amazon data, most of the track is still required intermediate tires, but there was one sector where dry tires were in theory the optimal tire. After those initial runs, Gasly, Sargent, Ricciardo were in the bottom five, while the Haas's hadn't set a lap time yet, were also in that group. And for Hulkenberg, he had basically been in the pits for the first half of the session, so I'm not sure if there was some kind of mechanical issue as well. Bottas was the first driver on slicks, on slick tires, which also happened to be the soft tires, and Leclerc was also on softs with him. Turn 3 was still quite wet. Drivers were going wide, including Norris and Sainz, and that was even on the intermediate tires. So you can imagine how slippery it would be on dry tires. Then Perez, unfortunately, with another qualifying special, he crashes on the soft tires at Copse. Basically, just a small snap of oversteer, put him on the runoff area. The runoff was paved, but basically, it's drivers haven't been going on it, so it's even less grip, has even less grip than the track. And then he basically just tries to correct the slide, and he basically just ends up spinning and going backwards into the gravel and beaching himself. So a bit of a silly mistake there by Perez, but as we would see later, there would be quite a few drivers who would also end up going through there. 15th, and I wrote 15th at best because we didn't really know what the track evolution was going to look like, and at that point, his lap times weren't too bad. Stroll was then announced, and then we had a brief red flag as well to clear Perez's car. And during that red flag, it was announced that Stroll would be under investigation for basically leaving the pit lane while the red flag was out. Basically, while the red light at the end of the pit lane was red. And I wrote Stroll to be disqualified for that because generally it's a pretty severe penalty. I just checked the internet before making this video, and it turns out no penalty. Turns out they judged that there was not enough time between when the light went red and when he exited the pit lane. It was like 0.8 seconds or so. So they're like, fine, you can get away with it. So I guess luckily, common sense prevailed there. Bottas, when we eventually got going after the red flag, Bottas improves by 4.7 seconds, really showing that massive improvement on the slick tires as the track was drying out. Verstappen then goes through the gravel at Copse, very similar to Perez, but unlike Perez, instead of basically trying to correct it and ended up spinning, he basically just goes straight, is able to carry enough momentum going through the gravel that he's able just to carry on with perhaps some floor and damage from that gravel. So Perez, and then Magnussen also made a very similar mistake there as well. So rain had basically started to fall at that corner just briefly, and I think caught a couple drivers out, including Verstappen and Magnussen. Raining was at that one part. So Perez, Albon, Tsunoda, Gasly, and Sargent were in the bottom five, and Sainz as well had his time deleted for track limit, so he was put back in the bottom five. When it was all said and done for Q1, a very eventful Q1 session, Bottas, Magnussen, Ocon, Perez, and Gasly were all out. Gasly not able to set a time at the end of the session. He was in the pit lane, and Perez, of course, was out of the session, and his car was hoisted up on a crane somewhere. So into Q2 we go. Leclerc, Zhou, Ricciardo, Sargent, Russell. We're in the bottom five after the first runs. Track still drying out a bit. There's still some damp patches. But the Mercedes were on used tires, so the expectation was that they would get a lot faster for that second run. And that's exactly what happened. A bit of a shock, Leclerc being knocked out of Q2 by Lance Stroll, of all people. Sargent also out, Tsunoda, Zhou, Ricciardo, the other drivers out. Norris was fastest, a 26.559. So not sure what was going on with Leclerc. Sainz obviously was able to get into the top 10. But yeah, for Leclerc, a bit of a tricky session out there. Into Q3 we go. Russell sets the benchmark at 26.024. Norris 6 thousandths of a second behind, and Verstappen only fifth. Doesn't seem like he was really in the fight for pole. 3 Brits in the top 3, so I'm guessing Crofty was quite happy about that. And Verstappen makes a bit of a mistake in sector 1 on his second lap, and he was about a tenth or so, a tenth and a half off of Russell's best time. So really not really already out of the fight for pole just after that first sector. But it turns out that all drivers were actually quite slow in that first sector. Pretty much everyone across the field, with the exception of the drivers who had done their first lap on used tires, were basically only able to set yellow sectors in that first sector. So not sure what was going on with the track there. Verstappen only fourth at the line. Hamilton goes top, and then beaten by George Russell of 125.819. So Russell takes his second pole of the season. Of course, got pole in Canada as well. An all Mercedes front row, so Toto Wolff will be quite happy. Lando Norris didn't finish his second lap, ended up just pitting, but you still end up with an all British top 3. So definitely, I think either the first time that's happened or the first time in a very, very long time. After that, you have Verstappen fourth. Honestly, I don't think a terrible session given the damage, and I don't think Red Bull really have had the best weekend. Really showing, I think, in car development, they've really kind of, that massive advantage that they had to start this year has basically almost completely eroded. So I don't know if we can really talk about a championship fight yet, but I definitely think that we can go into almost every race weekend from here on out and actually have real questions about who will win the Grand Prix, who will take pole position. Piastri fifth, a bit disappointing for him. Gap between himself and Norris was quite large. Hulkenberg sixth, another great result for him. Sainz seventh, 8th Stroll, 9th Albon, 10th Alonso, 11th Leclerc, 12th Sargent, 13th Tsunoda, 14th Zhou, 15th Ricciardo, 16th Bottas. Also shout out to Zhou for out-qualifying Bottas for the first time this season in a main qualifying session. Of course, it's a wet session as well. Magnussen 17th, 18th Ocon, 19th Perez, and 20th Gasly. So of course for tomorrow, wet conditions expected again, so that could really mix up the order. I would say, looking at the grid, who I would pick for the win. Honestly, I think Hamilton's in a great position, given we know how good he is in wet conditions, and given that he's starting P2. Russell and Norris, I think, you can arguably still have some questions about their wet weather ability, particularly Russell. And Verstappen as well. I think, wet conditions, he will also be in the fight for the win. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, and I'll be back tomorrow with my review of the Grand Prix. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.